There are managers who win trophies, and then there are managers who completely change football forever. Pep Guardiola did both. When Guardiola arrived at Manchester City back in 2016, the club already had money, elite players, and massive expectations. But what they didn't have was a football identity. Now, Manchester City don't just beat teams anymore, they suffocate them. They control every second of the game. They make elite opponents look exhausted just from chasing the ball around for 90 minutes. For nearly a decade, the Premier League has basically been forced to live inside Pep Guardiola's footballing universe. But now, that era is slowly coming to an end. Pep Guardiola is leaving Manchester City, and honestly, replacing him might be the hardest job in world football. Because how do you replace a manager who gave you everything? The Premier League titles, the treble, the Champions League, the 4 consecutive league titles, the greatest football Manchester City fans have ever seen. Pep Guardiola didn't just build a successful team, he built a football machine. And there's a serious argument that he built the greatest side in English football history. That's why this next managerial appointment matters so much, because one wrong decision could destroy everything Pep spent years creating. But Manchester City might already know exactly who they want. Enzo Maresca. Now, for a lot of casual football fans, that name still doesn't feel big enough. He's not Carlo Ancelotti, he's not Klopp, he's not Zidane. But when you actually start looking deeper into who Enzo Maresca is, how his teams play, and how highly Pep Guardiola himself rates him, you begin to understand why Manchester City sees something special in him. Because tactically, this guy is obsessed with football. And honestly, that's probably the most Guardiola thing possible. To really understand why Maresca could become Manchester City's next manager though, you first need to understand just how insane Pep Guardiola's impact on football actually is. Because this level of dominance isn't normal. Managers are not supposed to dominate multiple leagues for over a decade while simultaneously changing the sport tactically. But Guardiola did exactly that. At Barcelona, he built one of the greatest teams football has ever seen. Prime Messi, Xavi, Iniesta, Busquets. That side genuinely looked like they were playing a completely different sport sometimes. Then he went to Bayern Munich and destroyed Germany. And after that came Manchester City, the Premier League, the fastest league in the world, the most physical league in the world, the most chaotic league in the world. And eventually, Pep conquered that too. 6 Premier League titles, multiple domestic cups, a treble, 4 consecutive league titles. Nobody had ever done that before. But what really made Guardiola different wasn't just the trophies, it was the obsession. Everything with Pep feels calculated to an almost ridiculous level. The positioning, the passing angles, the pressing triggers, the movements between the lines. Every tiny detail matters. Some managers tell players to go out there and enjoy themselves. Pep Guardiola probably pauses training because your left back stood 3 inches too wide during build-up. That's the level we're talking about. And over time, Manchester City became an extension of Guardiola himself. Cold, precise, relentless. At their best, City genuinely made football look unfair. You'd watch elite teams spend 90 minutes chasing shadows while Rodri and De Bruyne passed the ball around like they were humiliating people for fun. Eventually though, every great era ends. And honestly, you could slowly feel this moment coming. The emotional intensity, the pressure, the standards, the constant need to evolve tactically every single season. Managing Manchester City under Pep Guardiola genuinely looked exhausting because Pep doesn't just coach football, he lives it. There were moments where he looked more stressed winning matches than other managers looked losing them. And after nearly a decade of carrying that level of pressure, the idea of Guardiola eventually walking away always felt inevitable. But here's the scary part. Replacing Pep Guardiola might actually be impossible, because the second performances drop even slightly, comparisons immediately begin. Pep City would have won that game. This team doesn't control matches like before. Pep never conceded goals like that. That pressure destroys managers. Just look at Manchester United after Sir Alex Ferguson retired. One legendary manager leaves, and suddenly the entire club spends years trying to recreate something that can never truly be replicated. That's why Manchester City aren't just looking for another coach. They're looking for somebody who understands the culture, the standards, the philosophy, the football identity. Somebody capable of protecting the culture Guardiola built while slowly evolving it into a new era. And Enzo Maresca genuinely feels like that person. He's young, tactically obsessed, already trusted within the City structure, and most importantly, he understands exactly what Manchester City are supposed to look like on a football pitch. Because once Pep Guardiola leaves, the biggest danger for Manchester City isn't losing trophies, it's losing its identity. That's what destroys football dynasties. And right now, Enzo Maresca looks like the manager most capable of stopping that from happening. Will he become as good as Pep Guardiola? Honestly, probably not, because nobody is. But can he become Manchester City's next great manager? Absolutely. And honestly, that might be the scariest part for the rest of the Premier League. Because after surviving nearly a decade of Pep Guardiola domination already, rival fans probably don't want Manchester City finding another tactical genius immediately after him. And the more you actually study Enzo Maresca, the more this appointment starts making sense. This isn't some manager getting hype because he won a few matches, and suddenly football Twitter started comparing him to Guardiola after 2 good weeks. Maresca has been preparing for this moment for years. He understands positional football at an elite level. He understands how to control games. He understands how modern pressing structures work. And most importantly, he understands Manchester City. That matters a lot more than people think, because the hardest thing after a legendary manager leaves isn't usually replacing trophies, it's replacing standards. And Maresca already knows exactly what those standards are, because he's lived inside them before. He's worked under Guardiola, learned directly from Guardiola, won trophies alongside Guardiola. The guy literally helped coach one of the greatest teams English football has ever seen. And when you hear players talk about him, one thing comes up constantly: detail. Everything with Maresca is extremely calculated. The build-up patterns, the rotations, the spacing between players, the pressing triggers. Even at Leicester, you could see how obsessed he was with structure and control. His team would dominate possession so heavily at times that opponents genuinely looked mentally exhausted trying to press them. And honestly, that's probably the biggest compliment you can give any Guardiola-inspired manager. Because the best Pep teams don't just beat you physically, they drain you mentally. You spend the entire match chasing the ball, shifting side to side, trying to close passing lanes that disappear 2 seconds later. And Maresca's football has a lot of those same principles. But what makes him exciting is that he's not just trying to cosplay Pep Guardiola on the touchline. There's more directness to his football, more verticality at times, more risk-taking in transitions. He wants control, but he also wants to hurt teams quickly once spaces open up. And honestly, with the players Manchester City already have, that could become terrifying. Imagine players like Foden, Haaland, Savinho, Doku inside a slightly more vertical Guardiola-style system. That could be chaos for the rest of the league. And maybe the biggest reason City fans should feel optimistic is this: Maresca feels hungry. Pep Guardiola arrived at Manchester City already as one of the greatest managers ever. Maresca would arrive trying to prove himself, trying to build his own legacy, trying to prove he belongs at the highest level. That hunger matters, especially after an era as successful as Guardiola's, because eventually, every dominant team needs fresh energy. And Enzo Maresca feels like exactly that, a younger manager. Fresh tactical ideas, modern coaching methods, but still deeply connected to the football identity Guardiola created, which honestly makes him the perfect bridge between Manchester City's past and their future. Now obviously, replacing Pep Guardiola will never truly be possible. There will never be another manager exactly like him. The trophies, the dominance, the tactical influence. Football may genuinely never see another coach like Pep again. But maybe Manchester City don't need another Pep Guardiola. Maybe what they need is somebody capable of protecting everything he built while slowly evolving it into the next era. And Enzo Maresca genuinely looks like he could be that guy. The next Manchester City manager, the next tactical obsession, and potentially the next massive problem for the Premier League. Now, if you want to know why Abdulkadir Kusanov might genuinely be the closest thing we've seen to a modern-day Paolo Maldini, then you need to check this video right here.